20 years ago, America was stunned when 1 million black men showed up on October 16th, 1995 in Washington, D.C. for the Million Man March. They were trying to figure out how did this happen, but those of us in the African-American community understood what was going on at that particular time, how the focus was so much on the state of black men in this country. Over the next hour, our roundtable will talk about what took place 20 years ago, more importantly, the role the Million Man March can play today and also in the future. It's not just about a gathering, it's also about what is going to happen next. We break down Justice or Else, the 20th anniversary Million Man March, right here on News One Now on TV One. Folks, I'm Roland Martin, and welcome to this News One Now primetime special as we focus on the 20th anniversary of the Million Man March, which takes place tomorrow right here in the nation's capital. Is the Justice or Else rally called forth by Minister Louis Farrakhan of the Nation of Islam. Yet it was 20 years ago when 1 million black men showed up on the mall, shocking many folks who didn't believe it was actually going to happen. Right now, I want to talk to a couple of folks who are very involved in all of this. Corey Masters Berry. She is the widow of former D.C. Mayor Marion Barry. He played a crucial role in the Million Man March actually taking place, and also Ben Chavis. He's the president and CEO of the National Newspaper Publishers Association, but at the time, he was, in essence, the top dog, the convener, the planner of the Million Man March. Folks, welcome to TV One. How you doing?
I'm doing good.
A lot of people, I don't think, really understand what was happening internally with the Million Man March. When Minister Farrakhan called for this, folks said, okay, gotcha, all right, okay, million black men showing up. And people don't realize we've had all of these million-something marches ever since then. It all started with this march.
That's right, and you know, I want to go back, and I'm so pleased to see the former First Lady here. Without the Honorable Marion Barry being mayor of the city in 1995, we would not have had the magnitude. Keep in mind, it wasn't on a Saturday in 1995, it was on a Monday. So it required some sacrifice. And these brothers showed up midnight on that Sunday night, and by the time the sun came up on that Monday morning, the mall was full of almost 1 million. And by 10 a.m., we exceeded 1 million men. I was the national director. The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan called for the march, but it was collective. Reverend Willie Wilson played a role, clergy from around the country. It was interdenominational, it was ecumenical, it was interfaith. All of these sororities, fraternities, we used the Phi Beta Sigma headquarters to mobilize the Panhellenic Council, the Masons, the Elks, the National Council of Negro Women, Dorothy Height. I mean, every formation in our community worked together. That was the lesson of the Million Man March, was the unity in responding to the call from the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan.
Cora, having Mayor Marion Barry was crucial because I think a lot of people don't realize 1995, virtually no one in black leadership wanted to stand next to Minister Louis Farrakhan. And Mayor Barry was attacked by lots of people for saying he was going to put his full support behind this march.
Absolutely, he didn't blink. The minister came to the office when he was mayor. We sat down. He said to the mayor, we need this, we need that, and my husband just said, got it, got it, got it.
But you also had to deal with lots of drama behind the scenes as well, because look, you had a lot of Christian pastors who were adamant against it. You had black political leaders who did not want to see this happen, and they were saying, please don't you dare stand with Minister Louis Farrakhan. The times we were living in 95 were totally different than where we are today.
But they showed up.
Right, and I think that we overcame some of those points of disunity, points of being frightened. Keep in mind, what led to the Million Man? Why did the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan call for the march? We had high incidence of black-on-black crime among young black males. The Center for Disease Control had declared black males in 1994 as an endangered species. And so a year before the Million Man March, Mr. Farrakhan had gone around the country and held these men-only meetings. Now, Cora was right. A lot of sisters got upset, said, well, how y'all going to march and leave the sisters out? And to the credit of black women and others who helped, they encouraged these brothers to come to Washington.
There were a lot of sisters who were saying, yo, can y'all let the brothers just go do what they do?
Yeah, we had a meeting in the basement of my home at that time to talk with the women who were the journalists who were writing against the Million Man March. I'm not going to call any names, but we had a meeting in the basement. It was those women, and it was Dr. Hyde, C. Dolores Tucker, myself, and some of the women from the Nation of Islam, Sister Nisha Muhammad, Sister Claudette, and we met with them and said, look, stop writing against it. You're hurting the whole. If you can't write something positive, just don't write against it. And but the need to hear the women's voices kind of prevailed, and that is when Maya Angelou agreed to do a poem, and Dr. Hyde agreed to speak at the Million Man March. And it's so funny because I compared the opening of her speech to what the Pope did when he was doing his commercial on Philadelphia. He said, I'm going to be there because you're going to be there. Well, under Dr. Hyde, she got so much criticism, so much pressure from her friends, said, you're the last icon that has not been tainted. You cannot do this. And she came and stood tall, and her opening words were, I am here because you are here. So when I heard the Pope, I said, wow, you know, shadows of Dr. Hyde. And you're right, it was a lot of back and forth doing that. It was the vein, and it all came out to be a glorious day for everybody. Women, men, the Christian preachers, many who were against at first, but showed up on that day. Some of our Christian leaders, that names won't be called, who really blocked and really made it difficult, they showed up on that day. It was
and to Minister Farrakhan's credit, he allowed some of the people that were trying to stop the march to speak.
Who were some of the biggest critics.
That's right. So it was a day of unity.
Yeah.
And that's why it was so impactful.
This was also the period of O.J. Simpson.
That's right.
And O.J. Simpson, that trial,
his trial concluded in September, and less than 30 days, we're here in Washington. And again, keep in mind, it wasn't just O.J. on trial. The black man in America was on trial, symbolically, at the O.J. Simpson trial. And so there was a tense moments. And there was some people were afraid, so, oh, Lord, if 1 million black men show up in Washington, what's going to happen? And again, to credit the Honorable Marion Barry, he stood fast. There was a lot of pressure on him. And then every member of the Congressional Black Caucus showed up at the march to express their support. In order to use those capital steps, we had to get a joint concurrent resolution of Congress, both on the Senate and the House side. That wasn't easy. We credit Congressman Danny Davis, Congressman Donald Payne, Congressman Charles Rangel, Congressman John Conyers, you know, helping work through the system so that we could have the right to stand on the west side of the United States Capitol. So a lot of factors went into it, but it was a glorious day.
So let's talk about that day for you when it happened. Because I remember going to the mall the day before, and it was what stood out the most to me was literally brothers greeting each other, literally as brothers, as sisters,
courteous. So, respectful.
All the way there.
Yes.
We get to that day, and literally, folks are streaming out of the subway station. I mean, I was at Union Station doing a live report, and man, every time a train came in, it's like, I swear, the entire subway, the entire train, were brothers coming for the Million Man March, coming from Newark, coming from Philly, coming from all over the East Coast.
New York.
And then from Kennedy Station, down East Boulevard and the Capitol Street, East Capitol Street, just thousands and thousands, just waves and waves. And keep in mind, the waves of brothers started showing up after midnight.
Before midnight.
That's right. And a lot of the networks were scrambling to get their crews in place. As you, in your introduction, there was an underestimation that it was going to happen.
The night before, there was a pre-rally. at the convention center, and it was Betty Shabazz, myself, Marion, many other people from the Nation of Islam, where people were just all pumped up. And when it was over, there was a dinner at the Willard Hotel, and so Betty Shabazz rode with me. And when we got to the Willard, I let her out, and I told security to take her in. She said, "You're not coming in right now?" I said, "No," and I asked them to take me to the mall, because I wanted to see and feel, because I knew the next day I was going to be in some ivory tower. And so that was only like around 9 or 10 o'clock.
Right.
And they were coming in, they were coming in with their sons, and they were laying out their little pallets, and they was talking to each other. And they didn't know who I was. I was just walking through, just crying and feeling, just felt it.
You have to understand, 1 million men, that's an army. 1 million men, but we were resolute, we were peaceful, not one arrest that day. When they left the mall, not one piece of paper on the National Mall. We left it clean. It was spotless. It was a sacred day. There was a sacred spiritual upliftment at the Million Man March. And that's why other groups since the Million Man March have gone over to the Park Police. Give us a plan of the Million Man March. You remember the Million Moms March?
Right.
The Promise Keepers, all these people came, and then we had the Million Women's March in Philly, two years later. So it was a milestone. It was a turning point. It was a great achievement for Black America to have something of that magnitude, peaceful, impactful, and having the kind of impact. Because you know, I mentioned that we had this problem of black-on-black crime. On that day, October the 16th, 1995, crime went to its lowest level in 50 years in the Black community.
Marion had just been reelected in this, historic comeback after he had gotten out of prison, and he had just been elected in '95. I mean, he just took office in '95. We had registered 20,000 new voters and got 19,000 of them to the polls, and that's how he got back in. So the minister asked me to head up the voter registration drive because I had headed that up. So prior to that, I went and met with Melanie Campbell at the coalition, and we put together a voter registration plan that we did prior to the march. We sent out packets. I mean, it was really complicated, but we did it. So over 1 million new voters of Black men were registered prior, and on that day the women were on site registering Black men. So we not only had low crime rate, we had an addition and a rise of Black men registered to vote, and that vote was felt in the next election.
Right. The National Association of Black Social Workers had a list of 25,000 Black children that nobody wanted to adopt. The minister gave out the 1-800 number as part of his address. We need to adopt our own children. You know what happened? After the Million Man March, those children were adopted by people who were at the march and who saw it on television. And 20 years later, coming to Justice or Else tomorrow, you're going to see some of those people are coming who are bringing those children who are now adults that were adopted as a result of the Million Man March. It was transformational of how we related to one another.
Is that, the last question
That's
for
a great
you,
word.
is that story and others, because a lot of people say, okay, fine, they gathered, nothing happened. But the reality is there were a number of things that happened.
Yeah.
Was it one institution? Was it one group sort of, controlling everything? No. But in my discussions and my reporting, there were a number of institutions that said they saw an uptick in volunteers. They saw a number of things that actually happened.
The NAACP increased its membership. Southern Christian Leadership Conference increased its membership. People went back to the Black church.
That's right.
Church membership went up. Certainly the nation grew. All those institutions grew. The fraternities and sororities, their ranks swelled after the Million Man March because it was a theme of responsibility, taking responsibility for the quality of life in our community. It was atonement, seeing what we could do. When everybody raised that pledge, say your name. And then they said their name, and they followed the minister's speech. And then, of course, we talked about the spirit of the Million Man March. Long live the spirit of the Million Man March. And the spirit of the Million Man March was the spirit of God Almighty.
Cora Berry, final thoughts.
Well, tomorrow's going to be another day. You can't ever replicate history, but it'll be a different focus. We have the issue of Black Lives Matter and justice. So let's hope that this spirit of the Million Man March is transferred till tomorrow, and the spirit of Marion Barry, my husband, who stood in the gap between the people who wanted it and the people who wouldn't let it happen. He made it happen. Let's remember what men like him represent, and let's all just show up and be there one way or the other for our people and for justice.
All right. Cora Barrett, Ben Chavis, we appreciate it. Thanks a bunch.
Thank you.
Coming up next, I will talk with Dr. Cleo Monago, director and producer of the Million Man March documentary, Thomas Hart, plus Pastor Jamal Bryant. Welcome back to our News One Now primetime special on the Million Man March 20 years later. Joining us right now to delve deeper into the Million Man March is Dr. Cleo Monago, also the producer of the Million Man March documentary, Thomas Hart, and also Pastor Jamal Bryant of the Empowerment Temple out of Baltimore. And he has a unique story, being in seminary at the time. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
So let's deal with this a couple different ways. Mr. Farrakhan extended this invitation to all, including Christian pastors. In fact, when he did the tour the year before, he spoke at a number of black churches.
Yes.
You were like, I don't want no part of this thing.
Let me tell you this, Ron. At the time, I was a seminarian at Duke University. My pastor, Dr. Frank Reed, at Bethel AME in Baltimore, was one of those host sites for the minister to come. And we fell out bad over it. My issue at the time as a young seminarian, as I said, Pastor, how are you letting somebody from the mosque speak in our church and nobody from the church is speaking at the mosque? Where is this relationship? And fundamentally, how are we being led by somebody who doesn't believe the same thing that we do? And obviously, I was in a very small minority. Well, I'm looking.
No, it was actually it was a lot of folks like no. I remember because that was some churches in some cities that canceled the appearance, and in fact, I believe there was some universities he was supposed to speak at,
right,
but they also canceled. And so a lot of folks forget this. It wasn't a wonderful we all get together. No, it wasn't.
Yeah, but I looked on the television and I said, wow, look at all these preachers. I later found out that the majority of those who were at the original were Christian black men that really said to me, there's a grave disconnect, that we're doing something wrong. So 20 years ago, I was in tremendous conflict theologically with where this stood, on where it is, the placement of Jesus Christ in this, and fundamentally, is this in fact the same ideology of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream, being a graduate of Morehouse College? So I was torn on so many levels about that first march, and so to be now 20 years later as one of the national co-chairs of it is, I don't know if I'm in purgatory or I'm in process, but it shows you how life and minds can change in a span of 20 years.
Thomas covering this. What often happens, we look back on these sort of milestone events, and we sort of have this wonderful rosy picture, but it wasn't all peaches and cream. It wasn't all rosy.
No, not at all, particularly in the early stages of the organization of the march. It almost never happened if it wasn't for the great late Marion Barry and the work of hundreds and even thousands of people on the local level here in D.C., but all around the country, to get the permits, to get the mobilization, to get the word out, and having it turn out as well as it did. It's just a blessing and something that we should all be proud of. Now, the inclusionness of this upcoming march is a lot different than the original march. The original march, of course, was an internal reflection and inspiration for black men, and that was important and very important at that time, and that's why I, as a filmmaker, took on the initiative early on to document this march, because no one knew what was going to happen. It was questionable even if it was going to happen, but it happened so well. I was glad to have been the official documentarian for the march, and I'm glad that we were able to share it with TV One, and we're here today and looking forward to tomorrow.
We look at this particular march, right, it is not so centered as it was in '95 or even in 2005. It is far more broad. Jamal, as one of the co-planners, co-chairs, what led to that? What was the discussion internally why this march needed to be different 20 years later?
The world has changed. 20 years ago, we really heavily leaned on radio and television advertisement. To know 20 years ago, we were still on flip phones, that there was no Twitter, there was no Facebook, no Instagram, no Snapchat, is that the revolution has become technological. In the rise and the emergence of the Black Lives Matter, and you're seeing really so many surges and pockets. To know 20 years ago, the minister went to St. Louis, but Ferguson was nowhere on his mind. He went to Orlando, but may not have known Sanford existed. And so the whole world has shifted into a whole level of a movement that demands our voice be heard and included. So many times these groups on the fringe or outliers would have in fact been heard in echoes and in pockets. But now, via technology, I can say, hey, why y'all don't have me on this program? And you're able to hear that outcry, that I don't have to wait until I get to D.C. to let my voice heard. But I can keep tweeting until somebody realizes that something has to be said about same-gender relationships. Something has to be said about our Haitian brothers and sisters who are being mishandled in the DR. Something's got to be said about a man in Delaware shot in a wheelchair that 20 years ago we may not have known about it this fast, but now it's ever before us, and now we've got a responsibility to address it.
The night has been long. The wound has been deep. The pit has been dark, and the walls have been steep. But today, voices of old spirit sound, speak to us in words profound.
There was a point in time during the event, maybe 3 hours into it, and there's nobody was on the stage, and we started weeping. And I mean noise, I mean snot, the whole thing. And no matter what kind of brother, whether he was feminine, tall, old, young, we just leaned on each other. And there was no criticism or concern about anybody's aesthetic or their demeanor. And we went into this place of moaning and crying. Did you see that?
No, I was there. But see, because I think people forget that it was called a Day of Atonement.
Right.
It's like you folks want to mention everything else, but it was called a Day of Atonement.
But what we missed is engaging that pain that brothers live with, that's always on the surface of our soul, that causes a lot of us to go off because there's been no place to actually deal with that and heal. And one of my concerns, I'm sure that the tomorrow's event is going to be good and powerful, but I think that black men need to have that moment again, and this time engage it and be explicit about the importance of transforming and healing that pain that we live with, that sometimes makes us go off in the midst of a cop and our lives is at risk or become abusive to each other, because there's this thing we're living with, that's this pain that for the first time in my life I saw it on a grand scale, but nobody addressed it. It was never talked about. And that's why I was wondering if it was in your piece, because every time I see a talk about this event, no one addresses that issue.
Got it.
Yeah, we've covered it, from gavel to gavel. We had 6 cameras out there that day. We're going to have 10 cameras out there tomorrow. And we condensed it into a 1-hour program, the official documentary of the Million Man March, the Million Man March story. We started taping about 6 weeks before the march, and we carried it on through the march and on from there. There was a lot of emotion, a lot of spirituality, a lot of energy in that march that day. And brothers did cry. Brothers did embrace each other. Brothers were extremely courteous and supportive and in unity, and that is what people remember from that march. There was no hesitation in our inclusiveness as brothers that day.
Absolutely.
But now this time we have Native Americans coming. We have Hispanics coming. We have women coming, gays and Asians coming. So it's going to be an interesting mix of cultures and issues tomorrow on the Mall.
Jamal, final comment in terms of what you want people to take away from Justice or Else. What is it they need to understand what this is actually about?
I think it speaks to my brother's observation of so much was poured out on that day in terms of emotion. Part of the challenge tomorrow is realizing that we're in a critical election cycle. 1 million African Americans, Latino, Asians, and we not talk about what is our political agenda, doing voter registration en masse. How is it that we move for reform? That I talk about our next step after protest is policy. We cannot come to the nation's capital and not give some redress. Roland and I were at the Congressional Black Caucus and said the real cause for us is after we leave here, are we going to keep coming back here? Not to march, but to lobby. And so I think that tomorrow history is going to be made because we're really going to pull together some political alliances. What are we asking of these 9 million people running for president? What are we demanding of them? And not just on the presidential level. We've got 30 mayoral elections that are critical to the black populace that have to be addressed, and our young people have got to be engaged too.
Gentlemen, I certainly appreciate it. Thank you so very much. Up next on this News One Now primetime special, Dr. Jason Johnson, Angela Rye, Faraji Muhammad, and Adam Jackson right here on TV One. Welcome back to our News One Now primetime special, looking at the Million Man March 20 years later. But the question is, what are we going to do moving forward? Joining us right now, political analyst and author, Dr. Jason Johnson, principal and CEO of Impact Strategies, Angela Rye, host of WEAA's talk show Listen Up, Faraji Muhammad, and Baltimore activist and CEO of the Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, Adam Jackson. Folks, welcome back to News One Now, this time in prime time. So I'm gonna start this off this way. Million Man March 20 years ago, how old were you?
I was in college. That's what I was.
That is not a number. Can you give a number?
I was in college. So what am I going to say? So
give me a number, man.
It was below 25. So I'm going to give you roll.
I'm 46. What's the problem? Jesus.
I got
Angela.
I'm really pumped. So I was 15, about to turn 16.
16.
I was 7, 20 years ago.
And so the reason I wanted to get that straight, notwithstanding this over here, all right, we have different perspectives. And so for you being 7, your recollection of the Million Man March?
I actually don't remember it from as a kid. I remember actually talking to my 5th grade teacher about, like, well, wasn't the Million Man March like a unity march amongst black and white people? And she looked at me like, what are you talking about? I didn't know who Louis Farrakhan was. I had no idea what was going on during that time frame. So and now looking back, I don't even remember the news coverage or anything when I was a kid.
Wow. Oh, I went. So I stood there with my father and my brother, and we stood out there early in the morning, Brother Roland, and it was cold, but it was a great experience for us, you know, just being out there among my brothers. We were close to the front than anything, and so I think we stood out there for at least 13, 14 hours, just standing, just being out there and just taking it all in. It was a beautiful spirit to say the least.
So I begged my dad to let me go with him to the, you know, he was there.
Yeah, I know your daddy was there.
So,
but black people are gathered, your daddy will be.
He will be there. And so I begged him to go, and he just didn't let me go. But what they did allow me to do was stay home and watch it on television. And so a group of all my friends, you know, I was raised a militant, Roland. So all my friends came over, and we watched the march together. We talked about what we needed to do. That was the year we founded the Black Student Union at Holy Names Academy.
Go ahead.
I mean, we did some things. We just weren't able to go. But it really, really moved me in a different way. And I just can't help but to think about the fact that in this moment, it's very chilling because while so much has changed, so many things have remained the same. Yeah. I remember like the stark differences between how folks saw the OJ trial, and the verdict had just come out 2 weeks before that. I mean, there are so many different things that it shaped in terms of my experience as a young black woman in this country. So it was major for me. And I still am mad at my dad. Eddie Rye, I'm mad that you did not let me go.
There was a group of people who all went. I did not go.
And I think in part because I ended up having a very transformational experience watching it on television. And the reason why is because I think I was probably a lot more conservative back then. And seeing what happened with OJ and seeing the Million Man March and seeing a lot of the sort of celebrities and political people at the time speaking so forcefully about what our community began to do and what our community needed to do, I think it actually changed me a lot. I think I went through that sort of began a process of moving my politics towards a much more progressive and some would say argumentative way throughout the rest of my college career. So
it was like literally it was a feeling, and I do recall after the march for the longest when a black man saw another black man on the street, the greeting was different.
Yeah.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, my homeboys in high school at the time didn't go to the march because they were like, brother, you gonna get out there, man, they gonna kill us. Y'all crazy, blah, blah. And I remember the sisters in school, I was like the only dude from my high school that went. I was like, nah, man, I'm going to the march. And the sisters was like, you know, give you that side eye, like, oh, you for real? I'm like, yeah, I'm going. I remember when I came back to school the next day, there was a different level of respect. They're like, nah, that dude's for real. He's serious about it. And I think that's...
Now, what he's not saying is sisters are like, you went to the march. See, he didn't want to bring that up. But his boys are like, see, look at me, he got all the numbers. He went to the march. See, you didn't want to say that, but I knew.
No, but you know, Brother Roland, like people really did change. The culture changed in America to the point where black men really, we started to love and embrace one another, to the point that we started to see value in one another. And I think this is what makes that march so pivotal. People asked as if they asked the question, what came out of the Million Man March? You had 1 million+ black men that came together who were of a conscious mind. And if we look at 20 years ago, how that impacted, you know, when you talk about the adoptions and all of that, but more than that, you're talking about a transformation. Those brothers that went to the march when they were in their teens, 20s, and 30s, they're in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, and look at where they are. They're educators. They're in corporate America, but they're not just in those places. With
that was a guy that was a state senator named Barack Obama who was there.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And now their mentality of consciousness has been shifted from thinking just about themselves to thinking more about the collective of us as men.
So atonement means we must be willing to do something in expiation of our sins. So we can't just have a good time today and say we've made history in Washington. We gotta resolve today that we're going back home to do something about what's going on in our lives and in our families and in our communities.
What do you want us to be saying here on TV One 20 years from now about Justice or Else?
Well, first off, I want us to be able to, and it's just like the young man mentioned, talk about the impact. I think whatever it is accomplished at the Justice or Else march will only be enhanced by us talking about what people do afterwards. And that was what was so amazing about
So not the event itself, what happens on the Monday after the event.
Exactly. What people do, what they go back to, what they donate to, the black businesses that make the t-shirts, that I think is the impact we want to be talking about 20 years from now.
So one of the things that I'm thinking about is how do we define justice? How do we move the bar and the needle forward? How do we ensure that black lives are not just matter but are protected and that folks are surviving? That is part of the conversation that we must have, again, agreed after the march, but also needs to be discussed tomorrow.
I mean, one thing I would add to the conversation, I think that one of the things that's missing from mainstream media and just the conversation in general when we're talking about, you know, things like Justice or Else or even other major marches is the necessity of black institution building and autonomy. Because I think that one of the problems that I have as a young person now, well, as a younger person now, is that I don't have a Farrakhan, and I think that Black Lives Matter, there's people like DeRay McKesson and others who are trying to fill that void, but I think we have to use that as an opportunity to figure out how do we actually use that narrative to drive people towards institution building, because that's, to me, that's the sustainable part of the work, is how do we nation build, how do we institution build. But I think that's what's missing. And I think Justice or Else gives us an opportunity to do that, and that's what I want to hear 20 years from now.
Well, I think what's interesting, if we're talking about today, what happened in '95 when people say what didn't get done is that a lot of the people who were critics, some who showed up, were unwilling to be a part of the agenda the day after.
Yeah.
And so the real issue now, I think, with Justice or Else is, all right, for all y'all who gonna show up, and all y'all who are saying stuff, then are you going to stick around after the cameras leave, after the gathering, to, yes, drive that agenda moving forward?
Because we literally can't afford for them to do, or for us to do anything else. Like, that has to be the narrative. Like, we are in a very critical space. We had the Urban League's State of Black America come out last year that says Black America's in a crisis. That's 20 years after this initial march. That's 50 plus years after the March on Washington. We cannot afford to dwell in crisis. We can't afford to go from crisis to crisis. We have to figure out how to unite and work together towards a common goal, even if the means toward that end are different.
I truly see this being a call not for just those who came 20 years ago, but this is a call for the millennial generation, or as we call it, the Joshua generation. This is the call for those young brothers and sisters, because those young brothers and sisters weren't present and 20 years ago, but now...
Keep in mind, see, I was 26 Million Man March.
Right.
So that event, and I was working for a black radio station.
Right.
So that event and covering it also played a role in terms of what I did the next 20 years.
Right.
And so you're absolutely right. The clarion call is important because what you do afterwards will now determine what goes next. Go ahead.
Because if you look at how the circumstances in this country have shaped up, there's no other call. Then historically, there has been no other call for justice since A. Philip Randolph in 1942. The call has always been about jobs and equality, but there hasn't been no demonstration that's solely focused on justice. And so to have this particular march at this point is critical. And then if we incorporate the principles of Dr. King talking about the redistribution of pain through economic withdrawal, I mean, that's massive in 2015. When you're talking about black people who have $1 trillion buying power, then you're talking about a millennial generation who they say by 2017 will have a $200 billion buying power. So when you're looking at that, that hits America right in the it hits America hard.
One thing I also think is really key here, the criticisms that we used to aim towards Louis Farrakhan and what he managed to accomplish, and what I think that means today as far as how we look at Black Lives Matter and the conversations that occasionally come up about leadership. You can have controversial leaders who still do great things. We have to learn how to appreciate the process of building institutions, as you've talked about. What they managed to build back then was amazing. It was something that was unprecedented, and you had tons of people who thought that it couldn't be done, and you've had amazing things be accomplished since. And I hope we have that same level of humility with this march, and recognizing that the new generation of people, they're going to stumble too, but just like 20 years ago, it looks great in retrospect. That's what's going to happen this time.
If we're talking about justice or else, and you're talking about those institutions and also being specific, here's one. I didn't go to one of the schools, but this is very clear. I'm sorry, you can't walk around saying you going back to your HBCU for homecoming, but then you don't send a check. Because you can't be in a situation where you're seeing schools shut down. You're in a situation where all of a sudden, if there's a corporate campaign, 60 to 80% of the money being raised coming from corporate America versus from the members. So part of that is, and again, if I'm looking at freed slaves who took meager pennies and nickels to create schools, and we're supposed to be that $1.1 trillion, at some point, you got to be honest. So part of this deal is, if you're talking about sustaining institutions, you can't have, you're not going to, your black leadership, frankly, let's just be honest, will not be coming from majority institutions, largely where you have white leaders.
Right.
The HBCUs play that critical role, and so folks have to recognize that's part. You can't allow those institutions to die. I'm in media. I don't care what anybody says. You can sit here and talk about how you love somebody on CNN or MSNBC and Fox and everything else, but if you don't have black media, Farrakhan couldn't have gotten the word out in 95. If you didn't have black media, March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom would have died. And so we're sitting here all happy, like, man, can you get a show on CNN? No. Why don't you watch TV One? Or our black newspapers and black magazines and black websites? That's also part of the institution building that positions us. Jason and Taraji.
I'll try and be more simple. For what Roland just said, for everybody who's watching, everybody's paying attention, if you can't go, send a check. Okay, I mean, because the reality is there is a black institution, a black media outlet, a black school waiting for a check. If you cannot go to these things, send your money, send your time, send your volunteering, and that's how we end up building institutions. And I think sometimes what ends up happening is people claim they don't know. people claim they don't know what institutions to give to, even though they're all out there and they're all readily available. And that's something that can change, because we don't have to have our feet on the ground to have our dollars go into the right pockets and make change.
I think one of the big things is, along with institution building, let's keep this march in perspective and in context. This is a march about justice. So it's a very, very high principle, on a spiritual level. The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, when he exhibited 20 years ago, people said, well, what came out of it? The purpose was the spiritual restoration of black men. At the end of the day, it was about resurrecting black men mentally, spiritually, about who they are and the connection we have to Almighty God. So when we talk about this context, yes, we need to have policy. Yes, we need to have institutions. Yes, there should be other systems in place. But at the root of it, you're talking about changing and transforming the condition of human beings. So if we get the context about justice, what the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad says, the principle of fair dealing and the law that distinguishes between right and wrong. If we keep that, then all of those other pieces are going to fall in place.
Final comment.
If we act, and that is my main thing, we have to have an agenda behind those ideals in order to see those
absolutely.
Absolutely. And I think it's for the smart, we pool our resources. We got over 40 million black people in this country, and you telling me that we can't fight a war on two fronts of dealing with black on black and dealing with the justice issue, threatening the sustainability of our community? I don't think that's the case.
Yeah, Adam, 20 seconds, final comment.
The best way for black people in this country to transform our material conditions is to own and control what we do. That's institution building.
Jason, final comment, 20 seconds.
Everything we do from this point on is going to be talked about in 20 years. Let's make sure that when we go to this march, it matters. If you can't go to this march, make an impact in some way financially.
And then continue to look at News One.
Exactly.
Absolutely. But I ain't trying to be here in 20 years. So I'm trying to position this for the next brother coming on, because I plan on being back home in Texas or in Jamaica chilling on the beach. All right then, folks. I appreciate it. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Be sure to watch News One Now on Monday, where we'll have a complete coverage of the 20th anniversary of the Justice or Else rally.